Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. A lot of stuff changing here this spring for Blue White Illustrated, the BWI Daily Edition. After some conversations, after looking at what we've been doing over the past year, we really wanted to be more interactive with you guys. We wanted to be with you live as much as possible. We had an awesome group of people that were in the chat during every show, and because we were live to tape and not live on YouTube, we couldn't interact with you the way that we wanted to. So in order to fit this correctly into everyone's lives and to try and make this as interactive as possible, we're trying something new this spring. This is the first BWI Live morning show where we're going to come live to you in the morning. Now, that time is going to be variable here going forward. We're going to try and find out what works best for you and for us. So here today, we're going live at 9:30. The other day, we went live at about 9:15 with some breaking news. So leave your comment in the chat. What time would you want to see a show? We'll also be doing a formal poll over at bluewhiteillustrated.com in the Lions Den message forum for all of our regulars who watch the show there as well, and we're going to figure this out. So stay with us. We're going to do our best to make sure that we get this as interactive and as possible for everybody so that we're all together here having a conversation about Penn State football and basketball. And I say and basketball because I want to bring everybody in here. Nate Bauer pulling both ends of the candle here, burning both ends of the candle up here, and he's also going to be covering basketball tonight, very late in NCAA tournament. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show, and everyone give Nate a round of applause. Well
Cheers.
done.
He's got at least 2 naps before he gets to this game. So
yeah, I was gonna say there's zero chance that I make it to a 10 p.m. game without a nap in there. So, hey, we'll see what happens.
We're going to get to a little bit of basketball. We've got a little bit more stuff going on here on the show today. I'm very excited for this. I've wanted to introduce more show elements into the show. So we're going to be bringing you, I hope, something really engaging entertainment over the next 35, 45 minutes. The first thing, though, guys, is the topic of the day, the topic of the week. Penn State football spring practice is here. The three of us were at practice on Tuesday. We all consumed and listened to what head coach James Franklin had to say. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But right now, Tuesday, the 10 minutes we get, it's always a fun thing to go, hey, what'd you see? Terms and conditions apply that we understand. It doesn't mean as much as what you might think. But Nate, you were with the offense.
Yeah.
What sort of impressions did you come away with?
I really zeroed in on Nick Singleton's calves. They look more defined. I don't know about you guys. Maybe okay. All right. The quarterbacks look like the quarterbacks. Drew Aller threw nice passes. Look, and I put this in the notes. Let's put it all out there. Let's just talk about this. The rumor of Drew Aller being cited on a scooter with a boot in February, there were legs to that, right? There was a reality of that having happened. And so in between when that happened, which was, I think, the last week in February, right? In between that and now, we saw Drew at a lifting session, right? In which he did not lift, but was walking around and looked okay. And then the more obvious thing was there were these social media posts of him running around looking great, right? Like training at home in Ohio, in which he's dashing around and looks like Pat Mahomes out there. So, between those two things, it was like, okay, well, yes, whatever it was must not have been that serious. And you're able to see him, I should say, on Tuesday in the flesh with your own eyes, run around, throwing the football, look fine. So, like,
crisis averted.
Is that a story? I would say it's officially reached non-story status, but James Franklin even talked about it in his press conference on Tuesday. So let's not act like there was nothing, but also that something is not big enough to rise to the level of an issue, right? And so that's massively important for Penn State football this spring and moving forward.
Fitz, how did you handle that whole thing this offseason with Drew Aller, and I know that this is these conversations are always, first off, if you wanted all the up-to-date information, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com Lions Den message board is where you would go to get all this stuff. But how did you view this and handle that conversation? Because as Nate said, it wasn't nothing, but it never really amounted to anything. So how much did you put into something like that this offseason?
Yeah, there's a lot of breath holding because, as Nate mentioned, there's something. He missed a little bit of time, and that's worrisome anytime that you have a prominent figure like a quarterback there. So it took a lot of our attention. But I will say this. People don't understand. Penn State's approach on injuries outside to the public is not much different than their approach in private. So, like, getting information on injuries I'm not holding all the injury information from you. Like, it's tough to get that stuff. So the ambiguity is the biggest thing, because we talk to people about it, and there's a lot of spinning gray area stuff like that. So yeah, there was a lot of unknown. He did not lift in that last session. Went home, worked with his trainer Brad, looked very good. So that takes some worry away, and then you've got him popping up on Tuesday. So very happy to put it in the past is the way that I would label this. So hopefully it's not an issue that crops up again. Just move forward, because I don't want to call it a competition, because we expect Drew to be the starter next year, but Bo's pretty good too. Like, every time I looked over, I saw Bo throwing a deep ball, and it looked different than I'm used to seeing Bo throw. Like, Bo was an athlete playing quarterback that, could throw the ball, as accurate, whatever, couldn't push the ball down the field. I was watching the defense. So set up in Haluba is we all sit on the sideline. Defense is on one half of the field, offense is on the other. I'm down here at the defense. So I'm, taking a peek every so often down to the quarterbacks, and Bo Pribula's throwing the hell out of the ball. Like,
it looked like it had more zip on it, right? Like, that was my observation as well.
Deep ball, I want to say right there with Aller, but like better than I expected from Bo, knowing what I've known from Bo since he was a freshman in high school. So that's encouraging. I will say the optimism in the program is not just because they want to keep him. I think there's an element to that. It's a transfer portal. He's a quarterback. Those things add up. But like, they're legitimately excited about Bo Pribula, and in another time without that other guy there, he's probably your starter. So that's I think that's something to take away from it. Again, I was on the defensive field, but every time I looked over, those quarterbacks throwing some pretty good balls. And I must say, it's funny to see freshman quarterbacks, January quarterbacks come in, because it is Drew, who's big. It is Bo, who is big in his own way, not tall. And then Jackson, who looks like Tobey Maguire in the first Spider-Man movie. Like, he's a little guy compared to those other guys. So it's a cool process of transition between those guys. So it's pretty great. So it's been fun to watch that progress.
It is. You make a great point. Looking at Pribula, he looked bigger than he was last year at this time, because he looked like Smolik a year ago in terms of he didn't really fit his pads. Now he looks like a college quarterback, and that was one thing that I was interested in his development was natural arm strength. What Drew Aller has, that is different. That's a special quality. But most quarterbacks, through their progression early in school, can get a little bit stronger. Like, their arm can get a little bit better, especially if it's a guy like Pribula that has a little bit more to give in terms of physically getting bigger, his legs getting stronger. Like, not to make a crazy comparison, but in the NFL, guys like Drew Brees, they don't throw with their arm, they throw with their body. That's how those guys generate power. So can he get stronger? Can he get bigger? And I noticed the same thing. There was a lot more zip on his ball this year compared to last year. Nate, you were up close and personal with the running backs. And a quick story. One time I called Dwight Galt to ask if the reason Saquon Barkley was so athletic and elusive was because his calves were so huge. So you're not the only person noticing running back calves. He laughed and said you should see his quads.
Yeah.
So any other observations from those guys when you were looking at the running backs?
And again, I mean, this is not in the vein of like, hey, do they look physically radically different? Those aren't things that I notice, and I don't think that they do. Even though I guess there were some weight changes for some of those guys. The thing that stands out to me about the running backs is you just have the depth, right? I mean, the drop off from Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who hey, surprise, surprise, are like the old guys in the room now. Tank Smith has some years in him, but he's a walk-on. Doesn't have a ton of carries in his career. So like that pronounced difference between, hey, here's 1 and 2. These are the guys that everybody's banking on for Penn State to get where they want to go this season. Like, that's great. But then you see the guys with them, and like, can one of the walk-ons climb to the level or rise to the level of being a legitimate option right before London Montgomery and Cam Wallace get in to Penn State this summer. So like, I think that's a real storyline. I think that's a real thing, because I wrote a story about it yesterday. They're going to try to balance how much work Katron and Nick get this spring. And I don't think Katron and Nick are of the same wavelength, right? Like, those guys want to compete. They want to play. They want to do all the same stuff. But Penn State and James Franklin, how we talked about it on Tuesday, was, look, we're going to get a ton of reps to the backups, to the 3 walk-ons, and get those guys as much action as we possibly can, because you know what you have in Katron and Nick. Well, okay, that's fine. That might be your approach, but certainly those guys are such competitors. They're so fierce about it that I find it difficult to believe that they're going to be okay with not really being full participants in this spring.
Is it full participation, or is it just they're going to get their reps and then that's going to be it? They're not going to get extra reps because there's no 3rd and 4th guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to be like held out for long durations of time, but will it be maybe lighter than a normal spring practice for that position? Yeah, I would guess. I mean, they're going to be treated differently this spring than they were last year as true freshmen. There's no question about that. So, yeah, I just think it's going to be a little bit of a different experience in terms of how Penn State wants to handle them, which is, this exists at lots of positions and lots of different areas on the field. It's just, it's kind of pronounced in my mind this spring.
Fitz, what did you saw a couple highlights there if you're watching here on YouTube. And by the way, if you're listening on a podcast version, always appreciate you guys. Make sure you subscribe to Blue White Illustrated wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching the video, please like the video and subscribe to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube. Super helpful. Fitz, what did you see on the defensive side of the ball? We focused a lot on the offense, but there's a lot of interesting names and faces over on defense. So what stood out to you?
Well, just remember, we talked to Chuck Losey before spring break, and everyone is a full participant regardless of anything that they do. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about the running backs. Defensively, not a ton to take away. A lot of the focus was on defensive line because Deion Barnes was taking over. Torrance Brown, as we said on the show and then reported the other day, is back as a GA. So it'd be interesting to see. That's a giant lack of like years of experience coaching that defensive line. So we'll see whether that tactic takes off right away or not. But when we take these practices in, we get to see kind of the linebackers front and center, safeties are front and center, corners are right there, and then the defensive line is on the other side. So not much you could take away from that. I will say with linebacker, we talk about this. We talked about this a lot last spring. It's a numbers game. They're a little bit thin right there with some injuries that they have. So some guys will get some more chances. We saw a couple of freshmen step up in Tony Rojas and Tamir Robinson. Tamir looks giant, like absolutely. I mean, he's not quite Abdul Carter because not many people are Abdul Carter, but he's a guy that can stand in that level. So that's pretty interesting to see that happen. I think it's going to be a very big spring for Kobe King. He was out there with the first team. Tyler Elston a bit limited right now. So I think those are the guys that you got to look to take steps this spring. You kind of know what you got with Carter, although he needs to get better. You kind of know what you've got with Curtis Jacobs at Sam. He also needs to get better as well. So just very interesting transition period with the linebackers because the numbers there are getting better, but they're not quite to the point where you've got a full 2 or 3 deep that you can run out with scholarship players, a couple of walk-ons working through there as well. We get the safeties. And again, I've been writing so much about KJ Winston and Zakee Wheatley. I'm going to lean to Winston right now just because of the things I've seen and the things I've heard. I think the kid's going to be really good. So it's just a matter of breaking through there. Jalen Reed is practicing. He had surgery this offseason, so that's good to see. Keaton Ellis still out there. The safety group, I think, is going to be fine. Like we had this show last week. Where's Penn State fine? Penn State lost Tig Brown. It's going to be tough to replace him in several aspects, but they've got the talent to do it back at safety. And then corner, Terry Smith is doing his thing. So I'm fine with that. Like they've got 3 starters basically in the outside corner. Storm Duck was out there. We got to see him running around. Johnny Dixon was with the first team, and probably not talking enough about Cam Miller. So there, you've got 4 guys right there. So you're thinking 9 defensive backs when you add in Daquan Hardy. You still got Dakari Nelson coming in, King Mack coming in this summer. So I think Penn State should be just fine. It's those positions up front that we're talking, or positions up the middle that we're talking about, middle linebacker and defensive tackle. They're still going to have to get better because there's no Keziah Izzard this spring. This is a guy that we talked about the other day as you know, this is the opportunity for him. This is the time for him to step in and be a starter, be a guy that can really bridge that gap from PJ to this new defensive line, but they're not going to have him this spring or most of this spring. So we will see what happens with that defensive line. Very much wait and see, which is not really a position you're comfortable being at with the defensive line.
Yeah, especially not having Izzard out there, who's the one guy, if you look down the roster, experience, size, athleticism, this was his year to put it all together, and missing the spring is a bit of a bummer. Now that obviously, if you're going to miss somebody, a guy with the amount of time he's gone through spring practice, maybe that's one of the better ones to miss, but still, you'd like to be at full strength all the time. I want to get to the safeties again. I just had a quick observation because normally, and this is inside practice for all of us, if you're watching, we don't get to see the safeties as much when we're outside. Just like we don't ever get to see the offensive line or the defensive line when we're inside. So I spent a good bit of time with the safeties, and I'll get to that in a second. But what are your impressions so far of Storm Duck? You mentioned he was out there with the second team. Just looks like game. What did he look like to you?
What did he look like? It is March Sadness here, or this time of year. Nothing. I mean, they were doing a pursuit drill, so he's playing second team cornerback. They're basically throwing a toss his way, and he's getting there. So no coverage skills, no real anything like that. They're running through their what they call the ball security drills on offense, but also on defense, their turnover drills. So just basically going station to station. So anything you're trying to take away in the big picture, like Storm Duck, Malik McLean, you're not going to see them splash in the 15 minutes that we're out there. So yeah. I would tell you the good things I've heard about Storm Duck, but I'll be honest with you, like there's not much you could take away from the Tuesday practice for that.
Which is why you should subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because as the season goes on, as the spring season goes on, we will have more information to share. And the place that you get it first is BlueWhiteIllustrated.com in our premium content and the Lions Den message forum. It is $10 right now to sign up for 4 months of access. So BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you sign up now, you get all of their unfiltered thoughts, or less filtered thoughts, over at the site, and you get some of that sweet inside information. The last thing before we move on to our new segment is just mentioning the safeties. One thing I picked up on, and we'll see how this continues throughout the spring, but you mentioned KJ Winston, and I thought it was probably intentional that right behind him was Zakee Wheatley in all of the drills. They don't necessarily play the same position when you actually go out there and play on the field. But when James Franklin talks about stacking your group so that you've got the 2s pushing the 3s and the 1 behind the 4. To me, that's a place where they're trying to put those 2 guys together to get the best out of each of them. So I'll be interested to see, like, first off, if I'm right about that, if they're going through drills, they're always competing with one another, and if that is the case, how that goes this spring, because, Fitz and I have talked at length about how much we think those 2 can be very talented football players on the back end, and the next generation of really good safeties for Penn State football. Next up, a new segment here on the BWI live show. It's called Between the Lines.
Didn't know that whistle was coming there.
I like the whistle. If you'll notice, I use it in a lot of different places. Before we get to our new segment, which is we are going to be playing James Franklin quotes, and we are going to then interpret them. Nate Bauer here is our expert and resident soothsayer of James Franklin comments, so we are going to be reading between the lines here on the show. We've got 2 clips for you today, but before we get to that, I need to tell you about our sponsor of today's live show. As always, This is RogueShop.com, one of my favorite places, one of my favorite groups of people, because they've supported this show since the very beginning when we went live in the beginning of September with this full new lineup. RogueShop.com is a husband-wife outfit of Mr. Rogue, Richard, and Shar, who are craft cannabis farmers specializing in small batch sustainable. It's not like I haven't done this all year. Sustainable plant medicine, a holistic type of small business, and these are the type of people you want to support. Small businesses. I wouldn't say it's not exactly local, but shop small businesses, help out those places that want to and can engage with you on a real level. When you go to their site, it's not a chat bot. You're actually talking to Shar on the website. She can help you through any of the questions you have about their products, what they do, and how they can help you. This isn't just fun time giggle medicine. Although it can help there, it's here to relieve you of pain, stress, and anxiety. Mr. Rogue, Richard, he is a veteran, and one of his life missions here, from what he and I have talked about, is helping people with pain. Chronic pain, things that have destroyed friends' lives, things that have driven them to other forms of medication. Some of them are not very healthy. RogueShop.com. Use promo code BWI for 10% off. Lets them know you're coming from us, and it gets you 10% off. And by the way, we have some new product on the way, so I am going to be able to tell you about something more than just the Delta 9 gummies. So I'm excited about that. We can tell you more, give you more information about Rogue Shop, and that's what we do here. We give you information. So, Nate, I want to start with your comments you want to talk about. James Franklin speaking about Deion Barnes. Here's what he had to say.
The other thing is a little bit like that was in that video is, although Deion is a letterman, and although the players and former players felt strongly about me hiring Deion, ultimately I had to hire the right person. And, you know, if that ended up being Deion, then great. It's a win on a lot of different levels. But I needed to make sure of that. And throughout that process, it just became more and more obvious that this was the right thing to do. The players need to understand, and I know Deion addressed this with him yesterday, like, this is not going to be the same Deion. As much as he thinks he's going to be, and as much as they think he's going to be, you know, when you're in a complementary role compared to, you know, running the show and running the room, there's a transition that happens. And, you know, it's going to be fun, and it's going to be exciting. And I also think we all got to play a part in that as well, in supporting, you know, Deion in that room through this transition. And that would be for whoever we hire.
So, Nate, I want to come to you here. Your thoughts. What struck you about this comment that you wanted to talk about?
It's probably fairly self-explanatory and maybe a little obvious, but Deion's 30 years old. Like, that's young. He's a young guy. I mean, not that I've been doing this forever, but in the span of years that I've been covering Penn State football, I mean, it really was not that long ago that Deion was one of the guys that I was covering pretty closely in his time at Penn State. So
Deion and I were in college together. Like we were there at the same time. So yeah.
But it's not about age, though. It's about experience. Like, that's the thing. You've got guys coaching, being head coaches in the NFL in their 30s. Like, this is not a situation where you're looking at that. Now, he took the roundabout way, played in the NFL, of course. I think played in one of the iterations of the Pro Football League. So he took a little bit more time playing football, got into it through the high school, and then got into a grad school. I think there's legitimate, you know, like, concern. Like, coaches always want the experienced guy, even if it's, you know, maybe not the right guy that the fans want. Like, they always want that experience, because that experience brings with them different practices, different methods of how to get the best out of players. And Deion's experience right now is all at Penn State, and it's all 3 years of being a grad assistant, which he alluded to in the second part. You can be a buddy as a grad assistant. You can be a mentor. You can be all those things, and you can be a mentor as a coach. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's different being a grad assistant than being a position coach, because the grad assistant isn't the one making the final say on a lot of things, and the position coach is.
You have to be the bad guy in a lot of situations.
He's going to have to be the bad guy eventually. And that's, you know, how do the guys that were, you know, pining for him to get the job, how do they handle that? And those are questions that we can't answer until camp until probably fall camp, to be honest with you. So I think those are the concerns. Now, tremendous upside. Like you can talk out of both sides of your mouth here because of the tremendous upside of him being 30 years old, him obviously being a rising star. If James Franklin didn't hire him right now, he might not get that chance to hire him. And, we've seen guys that have gone on to big success when that, when they don't fit that timeline. So it's okay to be apprehensive, not so much about the age, but about the experience. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Nate, do you have some follow-up thoughts on just the quote? And is he outlining the reasons why maybe Deion wasn't the immediate slam dunk, not going to hire anybody else sort of coaching search hire of here are the things we're concerned about, but we believe in him?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just makes sense. And he offered a window into that reality of everyone loves Deion. Like there's no confusion about that. Right. And so when you like someone, naturally, someone that's popular the way that he was going to have a ton of advocates in that room as soon as that job opened up. And so, like, in no way is that a bad thing. You want the guy that takes that job to be well liked, but also there are some pitfalls with that, right? Some danger zone things of just how you handle that. How you make that hire. James Franklin himself, right? I mean, it becomes a little bit of his own mind games of like, hey, I'm looking at this candidate and I know all of the things that he brings to the table. He furthered those in the interview process. Like all of that is great stuff. But also, yeah, you have to bridge that gap of, yeah, but of course everybody likes him. Of course, he's already in that room. Of course, that I think that James Franklin had to get past before he got comfortable making that decision. But it's just interesting. It's just an interesting, different, dynamic from what you might typically see. Although Penn State has pretty much a duplicate or a carbon copy example in Ty Howell doing really kind of the same thing. So it's not like it's totally out of left field. It's just interesting.
Ben gives his thought here, kind of summarizing what James Franklin had to say. Just like you said with Ty Howell, and James Franklin mentioned having a lot of lettermen in the program, something he's very proud of. But Ben says, I do think his comment was meant to say that just graduating and playing for James Franklin doesn't automatically get him the job. A very fair comment there. Fitz, you want to wrap this up for us, and we'll get to our next Between the Lines comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a factor. Like, it's a data point where the Penn State connection helps. It didn't get him this job, and I don't think that it's, his Penn State connection of being a graduate assistant and being well liked and doing all the things that he did in the program for the last 3 years far outweighed any other Penn State connection he had as a graduate, as a former player, all that kind of stuff. So James likes to hire Penn State people because, believe it or not, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, he does like to connect to the past in this program. And I think he knows it's very important. He's got, he brought Terry on from the start, just brought Calvin Lowry in this offseason, Dan Connor's in the building. There's a lot of guys that have these connections. But also those guys bring something else to the table. It's not just, it just doesn't say Penn State grad on their resume. So I think that helps. It's not a be all end all. It's not something that I think pushes anything over the line. But it's nice to have that connection, and it's nice to do it. But yeah, I don't think that his playing days and his, the signature on his diploma or whatever says much about how much that had to do with his hiring here. The reviews are in, guys. Steve says, love the morning shows. Put this on a graphic with some big sweeping letters. Love the morning shows. Mike says, this is so much better than 7 p.m. So BWI Live in the morning is catching fire. Nate has several different accounts that he's posting from right now. So.
like a 9:30 doesn't need to be 7 a.m. What? Just asking, folks.
Yeah, we want to know what's a good time for you, and we'll try to make all of that work. So like I said at the top of the show, what time would you like to see this show live? We are taking open suggestions. We'll be doing that to try and pin down what the best time is for everybody. Let's get on to our next question, or our next comment here. And we are traveling all the way to the far-flung land from defensive line coach to defensive tackles.
We are never going to chase size for size sake. That's where Leanne, our nutritionist, and that's where Chuck Losey, the strength coach, all of our weights are based on body composition. So if you got a guy who's naturally a high body fat guy, we're not going to ask him to put on weight because he's most likely naturally just going to put on more body fat. And we have a range really for every position based on not only our college experience, but also if you look at the NFL draft, what those numbers are. So we got a pretty good range of, are you in an acceptable range where you should be? And if you're on the low end, then you should be able to carry more weight. And we'd obviously always want it to be lean mass. If you're carrying lean mass, it should actually make you more athletic. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to gain weight and reduce body fat at the same time, which is easier said than done. That's also why we're really putting the emphasis on doing it in the off season, because we don't want to be messing with it during the season. And that's where if you can gain a pound every week or a pound every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks and just gradually put it on the right way throughout the season, that's what we want. But no, it's not chasing size for the sake of size.
Now, there's a ton of different ways, and there's a lot of stuff in there that we can go with. But I guess the first thing is, in reading between the lines, he also said at a different point, I think we can get more effort from our defensive tackles. I think there's another level of what we can get from them. And if you look at those comments of what he said, gain a pound a week, gain a pound a week, gain a pound a week, and then you go and you look at the roster and you look at guys losing weight and being on the low end of that spectrum, I think you can clearly see what this frustration of wanting to be bigger is about, because it's not about being 300 pounds. And this is where I think it's important for fans to understand. It's not about putting as much weight on as possible. It's about putting as much good weight on as possible. And Penn State may still be undersized for the defensive tackle position with the guys on the roster, but right now it doesn't seem like they're maximizing their size potential. Fitz, is that a fair way to read what he was saying there?
I look at the bodies in there, and I don't see anybody that's like on par with PJ in terms of a guy that can put all that weight on, because right now you've got a bunch of 3 techniques across the board, basically.
Yep.
And that varies from Zane Durant to, I guess the biggest one would be Caleb Artis, but Caleb Artis is not ready to go yet. So, I mean, he's just a bigger body. So I don't know that. I think there's probably too much focus on the weight, especially in March. This is the bodies fluctuate. That's what they do. And it's not important to have the weight on right now. The problem, and I know it's been pointed out here in the chat, is not the problem, but the Hakeem Beamon is such a ridiculous outlier at 256, I think it is right now. Yeah. You can't explain that one. Like that is so tough to explain, because he's been up and down, mostly down. He does this every year. We talk about this every year. I've tried to stop explaining it because I don't know like the genesis of why he needs to be 260 pounds. Can he not carry it? I mean, you look back, Ryan Buchholz got up to 270, 275, something like that. He had back issues because of it. I don't know if that's a situation that Beeman's dealing with, but it's not a situation where he's cutting weight specifically to play defensive end. I know it's been speculated in the past. That's not how it works. So I can't explain it, but I can probably try and pinpoint what it's not, and that's what it's not. So I think we're taking too much from the getting bigger conversation after the Michigan. I think there's a lot that goes into that. It's not simply just taking guys that are 315 pounds and putting them in there. There's a lot of guys that Penn State could recruit that don't fit that athletic profile, what they're looking for. It's athleticism before size every time. It's not even close. So I have a tough time separating Beeman from the rest, or excuse me, putting Beeman with the rest of the defensive tackles. Ideally, what they're going to go for with this roster makeup, they're going to get a bunch of guys that are near 300 pounds. So your Vandenbergs, your Izzards, you've got some other guys to work with. That's why they wanted a guy in the portal to try and counterbalance what they've got with Beeman, and line those guys up, be interchangeable, play 1 and 3, do different things with those guys. Just because of that, that's your roster composition right now. This is in the NFL. You can't go out and sign a 325-pound one tech. It's just not happening. So it's playing the cards that you're dealt. And yes, you're partially responsible or greatly responsible for the guys that you have in that room. But at the same time, it's doing it where it's not a deterrent for some of these guys. So if you put 310 pounds on Keziah Izzard, he's not the same player, and it's not good for your defensive line. So I think that's kind of what he's trying to say, in terms of, we need to get bigger, but at the same time, we need to, not forget what we are up front, which is an athletic group that is trying to compete with Ohio State, and got caught out of place last year with Michigan in more ways than one.
Yeah. Ultimately, it comes back to recruiting, right? Because you said there's guys with the body type of 300-pound big guy in the middle that doesn't have the athleticism, and this is the rub. A guy that is naturally going to run around athletically at 300+ pounds. Those guys are hard to find. So how do you maximize? And this is where he mentioned it again. I wish we were a little bit bigger, but he didn't harp on that during his comments earlier. And when I asked him about his philosophy of how to gain that size, it to me, we call what it is. You mentioned that Beeman is an outlier here of maximizing your size, maximizing the healthy amount of size you can put on your frame. And then he goes on to talk about Aaron Donald and how everyone wants to be lean and fast in Aaron Donald. And I got to imagine this is more than one player over time. This has been something that's been building up over time. Nate, you're shaking your head about that.
Yeah, no, it's like, there are very clearly, and he's not going to name them specifically, but there are clearly examples of guys that they've had specific weight plan paths for, blueprints for, that have gone in a different direction on their own accord. Mm-hmm. Right? Like through his, I mean, that's what's happening. This is just shade throwing from, without naming names. It's just like, hey, well, everybody's convinced. I mean, this is not the first time that these comments have happened, right? Yeah, they happened at Michigan last year, but there were other comments in prior seasons of players that were going through similar situations. And it's, can I sit here and give great insight into exactly who and exactly when? No, but part of that conversation is always on the end of, they're it's a resentment, I think, of players listening to voices outside of the building more than they're listening to the voices inside the building. And that's, if you're a head coach, or if you're a strength coach, or if you're a nutritionist or whatever, if you're any of those people, very clearly you have a deep resentment of that. And I think that in college football coaching, that is one of the hardest things to do. It is, I mean, I will say this just because basketball is on my brain right now, but it is way easier to deal with 16 players and their families and their handlers and their trainers than it is 125 by a long shot.
We'll be doing more with Between the Lines on upcoming shows. So subscribe to Blue White Illustrated here on YouTube. Hit notifications so you never miss an episode. Now we got our another segment, which is not a new segment. It is a longtime favorite. We're going to get to the mailbag. Got a couple minutes left in the show, so we've got we're going to answer 2 questions, and we're going to be doing this live on the show because I didn't get a chance to talk to everybody pre-show. I've got 1 question selected, but we've got a couple here in the document. So Fitz, I want you to pick your favorite after we get to Nate's question, and then I'd like to answer some from the chat. So if you've got a question about Penn State football, maybe Penn State basketball, throw it in the chat. But because of our time constraints, we're not going to be able to get to everybody. So a great way for me to notice your question is to donate a super chat. And I'm not trying to panhandle, but also I'm trying to panhandle. So let's get to our first question coming. Nate, this is about basketball. It's from Furdog on the BWI message board. What is the percentage likelihood that Micah Shrewsbury is coaching for Penn State basketball next year? And I will give you the option of giving the and why, but he says and why full stop.
Gotcha. Okay. I would say it's anywhere between 49 and 51%. Like that range feels right to me.
So either yes or no.
Either yes or no. Or maybe.
I've gone with this for a long time. Percentage, they're so dumb. Just everybody's percentage is different. Your 50% means different than my 50%. That's why we don't do this in the recruiting realm. So that's just my venting on that.
I'll entertain the question. Because we know what he's really asking, right? Is he going to stay or is he not going to stay? I think that it is to be determined. And I think that these are things that work themselves. Put it this way. I don't think that any of the offers or any of the interest that has come thus far has been so overwhelming as to shut the door on Penn State. Like, I think that that's an important place to start. It's not as though we're saying, well, Micah Shrewsbury got an offer from Notre Dame. He wants to go live in Indiana. And so it is a cut and dry, the whatever the resources are, whatever the NIL is, whatever the assistant coaching salary pool is, his personal salary, like all of those things, I don't think have created a situation where it's just like, oh, he's gone. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, he's gone. But I will sit here and say he has things to think about. And the reality of what his answer was yesterday is he doesn't want to think about them right now. Right? Like that's it. Is he doesn't want to think about them right now. He wants to go play and win a basketball game in the NCAA tournament. So like that's an important starting point. I mean, I will share that I think the trend from Penn State side of things has been positive. And if you want my full answer, I'll be totally honest. You got to go to our message board. It's $10 for 4 months. You got to pay for it because there's real insight there. But I will offer that the direction, which I would have argued was not great in the middle to the end of the season in terms of the commitments that Penn State was making to the program, have since changed. Right. And I'm not going to call it a flat out pivot, but it's been better. It's been better than it was. And that's important, right? That's an important ingredient to being able for Penn State to be able to retain Micah Shrewsbury. There's so much stuff that goes into it. I don't want to sit here and act like I'm inside Micah Shrewsbury's brain. I'm not. But what I can get is kind of a full perspective of all of the different things that go into this, the things that he has to consider. And is it totally like on Penn State's side in this case? No, it's not. It's not. There is work that had to be done and has been done, and work that continues to need to be done. So here you are. It's March 16th. Guess what? Whatever happens with Micah Shrewsbury next year has time to be resolved, but what doesn't have time to be resolved is beating Texas A&M at midnight tonight.
That's another thing I wanted to say is like, it's March 16th and we're having this conversation. First off, we're having this conversation about a Penn State basketball coach of being desired other places. And secondarily, it's the middle of March and they're still playing. I mean, Fitz has got his March Madness shirt on. Look at that.
This is a collector's item. Thank you very much. This is the 2020 NCAA tournament shirt that never happened. They should have gone, but never happened.
That's got to be worth some money. At
the Penn State bookstore. They didn't know what they had, so got a couple.
Quick question here from the chat. This is from Robert. He says, has denied Dennis Sutton bulked up enough to play inside? Not full time, but James Franklin mentioned some things they could do in the pass rush this year. Fitz, would you agree that maybe on pass rushing downs you could have 3 defensive ends on the field with Adisa Isaac, Chop Robinson, and Nittany possibly rushing from the inside at 260 plus? He's bigger than Beeman at this point.
I think that's a probability, to be honest with you. Like, they've done that in the past where they, set those 3 guys up in the front and go after it. And Nittany is big enough to, handle the minute chance that somebody's going to run. And we're talking like 3rd and 8 and more. So this is not a situation where you're, asking him to stop the run. But yeah, he is 260 some right now. He's a big guy. But he's not an every down player inside, but he will slide down, and they've had some success with that. So I'm excited to see that. Also excited to see the counterbalance there of, do you use Dennis Sutton in that realm? Do you use Zane Durant in that situation? They did it with Zane Durant in the Rose Bowl and at the end of the season this year and had some success with it. So excited to see the pass rushing capabilities of the young guys that you can just kind of put in there and let them go from the interior.
Yeah, that's a good problem. I've been trying to work that through my head of like, okay, who comes off the field or who goes on the field if you've got Nittany and Zane, who was rushing from the zero technique and some of those pass rushing stunts and got a couple sacks from there. So productive last year. Do you want to change that up? Maybe you go down with a 4 down front. They have so many options now. Fitz, where are we going with our last question here from the message board?
Let's talk about offensive linemen there.
Okay. Here we go. So we've got, this is from Brian Reintz. It seems like Wormley may be a good fit at center, and that would allow Vega Ioane to play guard. What are your thoughts? Let's start with that one, Fitz.
I actually think that both of those guys can play center, and be more apt to see Vega there right now, just because you expect Wormley to be that full-time right guard. So when you're moving those pieces, you want to move your second guy a little bit more. But I think both of those guys will get snaps at center. Hunter Norzad, James Franklin confirmed the other day, not full go to start spring. So you're going to have to play around with that. Obviously, Landon Tengwall, not full go to start spring. So that's 2 of your top 5 guys. So you're going to have to play Vega. Not out of position, but you're going to have to move him around. You're going to have to move Wormley around a little bit and get both of those guys some quality experience. So I think I would lean toward Wormley as the emergency center if we're going to go that way. I know we talked about Dawkins the other day, but Dawkins is coming off an injury as well. But I would lean toward, if a situation happens where one of those guys, or Norzad specifically, would go down during a game, you slide Wormley to center, you put Vega in at guard. You're asking a little bit less of the redshirt freshman to put him at right guard than putting him at center and having him make the call. So I think that makes a lot of sense from that standpoint.
So let me ask you a follow-up question to this, and let's rewind a little bit more than a year ago, where Hunter Norzad is choosing between Penn State and Auburn, and he chooses the Nittany Lions, a huge win in the transfer portal. And basically since then, Penn State fans have disregarded him as a player. It feels like when we get these questions, it's like, do you trust him at center? Is he any good? All on this line of questions. So do you trust him to play center? He seems to be the guy that is the top line center. And what is it that's making fans hesitant about his play?
Well, he got overpowered last year. I mean, that was a big jump for him from that level to Penn State's level. And I will say, you mentioned Auburn. The thing that I took away from Hunter Norzad's recruitment, it wasn't quite Auburn. It was more Illinois and Iowa were the 2 other ones. Illinois and Iowa know what they're looking for in offensive linemen. Like that, yeah. Those are Brett Bielema knows what an offensive lineman looks like. I know it's Illinois, so you're not going to equate those on the pantheon of Penn State, but Brett Bielema knows what he's looking at. Put on that tape from a couple of years ago. You can see why. So I take those evaluations and bogart them as my own. No, I think he can play center. He's got the length to do it. This is not Mike Miranda. No disrespect to Mike Miranda. His arms are long enough. He's not going to get beat with the reach and things like that, like Miranda was. So I think that's probably like the PTSD there with Penn State fans, is they don't think that they saw him get pushed back against Auburn, against a couple of these other teams on the schedule. And they're, not optimistic about it, but I think he can handle it. I think it's he's a smart guy. He can make the calls, and he can hold up there. He's a strong guy. He's an athletic guy. He was playing on one wheel essentially for most of the season.
I think
that's why he's not really practicing this spring. So I don't know that we saw him healthy. What was it? The Ohio game when he got hurt? Like week
second
2?
game of the season. Got rolled up on.
So I'm not here for the Norzad hate, to be honest with you. I think he's capable. I think he's fine with it. We'll see what happens with the other guys around him. I will say, while I'm, confident in that, I am excited to see what Vega can do if they put him at center, because this is such a different body than we're used to seeing, especially at Penn State as a center. So I'm curious. That I think they've got 5 options for the interior. I think that's perfectly fine. You get 3 options for the tackle spot and 8 guys. That's good. So I think that he'll be fine at center. He's got, like I said, he's got the 33-inch arms. He doesn't have the 30-inch arms, and that stuff matters in the sense that not only can he reach the guy, can he reach a linebacker, can he move around? Is he athletic enough to do so? Yes, but also he's pretty strong, and he's a smart guy.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of the conversation that people, when we do this, like, we're forgetting he was injured and playing through injury. And no one wants to give people credit for that at this point because he was not performing to the level of their expectations. But that's a reality that when you get rolled up on, and the number of injuries it can be at the ankle, the knee, any of those places when that happens, and then you take some time off, come back, clearly not full strength. This is part of the conversation that I had with Chuck Losey, that I probably asked the question wrong, but like, when you don't lift in the off season and you are not part of that fully, like you can't squat, can you make up that time of muscle gain and strength in the off season? Because there's a couple of offensive linemen that are in that situation right now that you detailed. What is the expectation for their level of performance? Not that they are good, because their technique and all that stuff make them good, but what is the level of taking the ball and advancing it downfield from their play perspective? And being injured clearly inhibited what we could see from Hunter Norzad. I still expect both those guys to be better this year than what we saw last year. Any final thoughts, guys?
The thing there, before we move on, what do you expect Penn State's record to be in March and April? 0-0. There's no games. Get healthy, get back, do what you got to do. I don't expect Hunter to be an All-American, but I think he's capable of going in there and making it work in the fall. He's been around for a while. His base strength there's a lot to work with there, but yeah, you're right. You've got to work that lower body once you get healthy. And then when you get healthy, you make it work.
Yep. Guys, this was a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed this show as well. Please like the video. Please subscribe to Blue Eyed Illustrated on YouTube. Always appreciate everyone showing up today. Guys, any final thoughts? Nate, anything you want to give about basketball tonight coverage?
Yeah, I mean, I'll have a preview, and I think maybe you and I can talk about it off air, but there's probably going to be a podcast between now and the start of the game. So we'll chat a little bit about it and see what Penn State does.
The problem is I'm not an actual early morning shock jock with the because I actually hate that sound. But yeah, there's some news for you. Check out a hoop show coming up today as well. Fitz, any last words for you?
No, I said good things about Nate's coverage the other day when he was not here. I'm not going to say it while he's on the air.
Well, good enough. That'll
totally
do
fair.
it for the BWI live show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Once again, if you're watching this show on replay and you want to join live, what's a time in the morning that works for you? We'll be getting that information. We'll be asking our loyal subscribers at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as well. And if you want to get in on that, $10 for 4 months of access. We'll talk to you next time.